my name is Margaret Brumskine Riggs. My father's name is Philip Johnson Lasanders Brumskine. His mother's name is Margaret White Brumskine, and her mother's name was Janine Worrell, and her father's name was John T. Worrell, who came from Barbados to Liberia on the Cora in 1865. My dad, the Worrell side of his family, the discussion always came up because the branches, there were so many of them. I don't know if you see on the picture, I think there are 9 children or 8 children. And all of those relations my dad have kept, and his family kept in touch with, especially my grandmother. So they always talked about the Worrell part of the family. And similarly, my grandmother, that I guess that's her grandfather, seemed to have been a very prominent man in Buchanan. At one point, one of them was a judge. And so the conversation always went on about all of these Worrell people that we related to from Bassa. That comes with Nehemiah Dixon. And Nehemiah Dixon and Dave Dixon, their grandmothers are Worrell, who's related to us. And actually, Nehemiah's mom, I had the opportunity to sit and talk to Nehemiah's mom, who always tried to explain the relationship to me between her mother and my grandmother, and they're growing up and all this, this history. So yeah, I'm quite aware of the relationship. Also in Buchanan, there's a separate cemetery. It has a gate on it that belonged to the Worrell family. So that when we go to bury, like my Uncle Hannibal, when he died and we had to go to bury him, you see the place. And now as we speak, when my MME died in 2018, I think it was, and I went to Liberia carrying, the gate is still there. The structure is still standing. They made statues. I mean, showing some kind of opulence for that family. So yeah, it's something that came up, and it's something that we talked about. And coming back to the U.S., like I was sharing with you, how my dad, Church, the United Methodist Church, Hanson Place United Methodist Church in Brooklyn, there are people from Barbados who then would refer to my dad and say that there was resemblance between some of my siblings and their family people in Barbados. Margaret Brumskine, my father's mother, was a teacher in Buchanan, and she owned her own shop. When she was young, she owned a provision shop. And my father explained how in Upper Buchanan, that's where people came to buy all their produce for my grandmother. She owned a shop. And also, my grandfather died at 49 years old. He was very young when he passed away. My dad was in CWA when his father died. And my grandmother, on her own, took my dad, and they're related to Vice President Simpson. And so she sent a message and sent my dad with a letter to Vice President Simpson to say he has to find a job for my dad while he's in school because he got to help to support the family. Because my dad is second in line with the family, but my uncle got married very young. So then my dad was the oldest. And so Margaret Brumskine sent him to Clarence Simpson to find him a job to help support the family. And Gran has always been very industrious, very, a parent who want to make sure her kids get everything. And she had about 6 of them. So Uncle Hannibal had married. She had all these children. Her husband had died. She had her oldest son. You got to find a job so you can help me to take care of the rest of your siblings. So he ended up working as a private secretary for Clarence Simpson, who was his cousin, his mom's cousin, so his second cousin. And Gran would order her children clothes from Montgomery Ward. And those are the kind of things where when I met Gran, I was 13, and Gran she wore what they call corset. She was always really nicely dressed. Gran, you know, ate the best of food, came to Monrovia and lived in Buchanan, built, you know, well, she and her husband built the house, well, renovated her house. Grandkids always been very industrious, very, you know, very firm. The person who made all the decisions with all her children. I mean, my dad was a man, and whatever Grand said goes. That's the kind of personality, that's the woman we're talking about. Just remember Grand being a disciplinarian, a no-nonsense woman, and also a woman who, Grand remind me of the Proverbs 31st woman, Proverbs chapter 31 woman, who was just, she was I mean, Grand was an innovator. Grand did a lot of things. Grand was the kind of person who, as far as we were concerned, everybody in our family, when Grand came up around, Grand made the decisions. She just always had been that kind of strong person. She had a strong personality in our family. And also, Grand had no problem telling my dad, because my Uncle Hannibal was doing farming. You know, he was a representative, but he loved farming. He lived in Buchanan, not far from Grand. They had a very special relationship, she and Uncle Hannibal. So Grand had no problem telling my dad to buy Uncle Hannibal a car. Those are the kind of instructions she would give, and they will be followed. She's like, you need to buy a pickup truck for your brother because he has a farm, and that's it. And Grand, you know, Grand was just, yeah, she was a huge presence, put it that way. So my dad was a storyteller. So I know a lot about my dad growing up because he told me those stories himself. So he talked about how when he was young, he would be in his mother's shop as a young boy, and people come to buy, and if they don't have money, he would give away his mother's produce. He would give away Grand produce, and when Grand found out, they would beat him, beat him good, because and he would try to justify and say, oh, you know, that's my friend. They didn't have any money. He asked me to give it. So, and he was very mischievous. My dad is the one who told me how when they were younger and they go to church, they have what they call those synod meetings or whatever, where they're praying, they want you to accept Jesus Christ. They said the Holy Ghost will come into you. And my dad said every time they would go to prayer, so somebody would jump up and say they got the Holy Ghost. He's sitting lying now. He said in the church on the pew, he can't feel no Holy Ghost. All these people jumping out and saying they feel the Holy Ghost. He said, so this particular day, somebody was burning their goat or something in the church, and then you smell it. He jumped on, he started yelling. So they said, then they usually ask them, what did you see? Somebody would say, oh, I saw an angel. I saw something. He said, I smell it, it was a goat. So by the time I can remember, my dad always like and I don't care how serious he just taking things for joke, right? But he said in Buchanan, they grew up where everybody knew everybody, and they, you know, they were not wealthy, but they lived well. So he had a lot of pleasant memories about growing up. His dad, in particular, he always tell me how his dad died very young. And again, I was telling you how Gran was a very huge presence. Gran, you know, basically had to take care of them from all he can remember, her being the decision maker, etc., etc. And he always goes back to when his father died, and he sort of had to become the man of the family. That his mother made him very aware. You got to support your family. It's that mentality. And even today, it happened to us. I mean, us growing up, coming to this country, coming from the Civil War, my dad would always say to us, it's like, you know, you're your brother or your sister's keeper. So he would say to me, you know, you gotta take care of your brother, or you gotta take care of your sister. So he passed that, whatever it was, that responsibility that was given to him as a young man, he passed it to us as his children. And so he told me he was in CWA. At that time, you know, people were going to school. I think he said he was 20 years old when he started working with Vice President Simpson as his private secretary. And he said because he used to type so fast, President Tubman one day kind of just in the place, just heard his typewriter. He said, "Who's that young man?" And Vice President Simpson said, "Oh, that's my cousin, Margaret Brumskine's son." And then President Tubman said, let him come start working for him. And during those days, they used to say private secretary, which is not kind of like Secretary of State. So my dad was in his 20s when he became President Tubman's secretary, or Secretary of State, however you want to call it. And he was there. He went to law school in Liberia at the Grand School of Law. When he graduated, he started as an apprentice with Councilor Garber. Councilor Garber had me his law firm, and after he passed away, my dad started private practice. My dad later on as a renowned attorney, but before that, traveled with Tubman. They used to they went to the United Nations, went to Italy with what's the man's name? Townsend, Reginald Townsend, all these people. And so, you know, my dad did a lot of traveling with Tubman. Then when he started private practice, he then, the kind of law that got him out of Liberia coming in foreign mission were called intellectual property. So registered trademark for Texaco and JP Morgan Chase and all of these companies. And so he would find himself coming to the US, going to Switzerland, et cetera, et cetera. But my dad has always had a humility. It's like all of those things happened, but he was our dad. That's all we knew. He was not only our dad, but dad to all of my father's nieces and nephews and the people in our neighborhood. So yeah, he's a very humble man and very Christian man. And also what used to intrigue me about my dad is that he was interested in also talking to people from other religions. In my house, there was a Bible. There was a Bible in the Quran, because he had some Muslim friends who would explain to him that there a lot of similarity between Christianity and the Muslim faith. So he had a Bible in there. He had a Bible in there, a Christian Muslim Bible, like parallel, where you could look at. And he started wearing these Mandingo gowns. One time I said, "Pa, you won't be Mandingo man?" He said, "No," but you know, he had so many of these Muslim friends, and they would give him these gowns. So when he come from work, take his suit off, he would put on his gown, walking in the neighborhood. You personally know how close I am to my dad, but one of the things that I've always loved about my dad is the fact that he was friends with so many people from all walks of life. You know, he had friends who were, they would speak Bassa, and my dad speaks very fluent Bassa. He lived in Buchanan before he came to Monrovia to go to school. So he had all these friends. The people would come to the house. The Bassa pastor would come to speak in Bassa in my living room, and my dad had me making tea for the Bassa man. And then Councilor Henrys would come out making tea for Councilor Henry. There were no, you know, separatism as far as he was concerned. But he was also very much, you know, he did a lot of research on family and genealogy and all of that. So yeah, he was a well-rounded man. You might have to ask me particular so I can tell you maybe if you're looking for something else. But my dad was very jovial, very spiritual, you know, a father to a lot of people. Like my friends, you know, Masa, you and Joyce, everybody would say Philip, because that's just how he carries himself with people. My dad's best quality was his integrity. And what he always told me, and what he always practiced, is integrity. So particularly as an attorney in Liberia, there were a lot of things that, you know, he did try to discourage me until I want to go to law school. He said, "Look, I think that's not something for you to do," which means he thought it was just too many bureaucracy modalities that were not forthcoming. But my dad was he was a man of integrity. So the same way he would treat the millionaire or the business owner is the same way that he would treat that woman from Bassa whose property was being taken, or someone else was trying to take it. He had a lot of integrity, to the point where my dad did not stop going to court. When the court system in the 80s, because you remember, like us, we came here in 1980 after the coup d'etat. But then my dad went back to Liberia because he tried to see if he could go back and stay. His intent was not to live in this country. When he went home in the 80s, things had gotten so out of shape, my dad didn't really go to the courts anymore. He had young lawyers working for him, and those are the people he would send. And then he was very realistic about how the court system had gotten really corrupt. So he would say things like, I can't do it. I just can't go. He would go to the Supreme Court, where it was more like legal arguments as opposed to factual arguments. So he was a man of integrity. He was very kind. My dad if I had to count, my dad put over 200 children paid for more than 200 children education from elementary to college. And then after I graduated from college and went back to Liberia in 1984 to go to law school. When did I go back? Yeah, 1984 to go to law school. I noticed that my dad had started every Saturday. He would give money to all these handicapped people, blind people, because there were a lot of people in Liberia at that time who were, there were no services for them. So they would just come to the office on Saturday. Every Saturday, he would have the secretary who worked for him change like maybe $200 US. And then other people come, everybody get $20 or something. So every Saturday, the people would come to my dad's place for money. And also the neighbor who we live in, on 16th Street, there's no zoning in Liberia. So you have your home records here, there's a zinc shack. And family living there, 6 children in there. My dad would be paying people tuition, giving food. I mean, just think about it, So yeah, he was a very kind man. His integrity and his compassion. Those are the 2 things I won't forget. And in a way, I'm grateful to God because those are the things that I were able to copy. I know that it's important. I know that it's so important to have integrity. And then the definition, which I'm sure he heard from somewhere, he said, look, integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's watching. Doing the right thing when nobody's watching. And so I try to be, particularly when it comes to people's rights, I try to be respectful, and I try to be understanding, and compassion. Yeah, so in a way, I feel those are the things I inherited from my dad. My dad family, his family came first. That's how they grew up. So Uncle Hannibal, who's his oldest brother, then it's my dad, then it's Aunt Winifred, who only had 1 child. Aunt Winifred, she only had 1 child. Then it's Uncle Walter, who's a doctor, Dr. Brumskine. Then it's Aunt Mamie, who's his youngest sister, and she only had 1 child. This is the thing. The 2 girls in my father's family, his siblings, his two sisters, each one of them only had 1 child. And then the brothers, they all had a lot of children. Like Uncle Hannibal had 12 children. Uncle Walter probably 8 or 9. My dad about 6 of us. But the family was very close. My Uncle Walter might well be living in our house because every day after work, Uncle Walter leave from JFK, he would have to pass our house to go home. He would stop. My dad, same thing. He would go to Uncle Walter's house, so that my Uncle Walter's children and us grew up more like siblings than like cousins. And he and his siblings were very close. And Uncle Hannibal, actually, he died from cancer in Liberia. And I remember how Uncle Hannibal, when he was very sick, my dad would say, go to your uncle's house, go see your uncle. And that's how my dad actually inherited, I guess, his mother's stance, which is it wasn't like, it was always, you're responsible for your siblings and your family kind of thing. So it's like, go see your uncle, go to your aunt, go to this person. My Aunt Winnie, she lived in Basso when my grandmother died. Grandma Margaret Brumskine died. And Winnie was dead. She had been there with Gran, and she was very devastated. That summer, after my grandmother died, my dad sent me to Basso. I spent the whole summer with Aunt Winnie because he didn't want Aunt Winnie to be alone. That's the kind of family that they came out of. Very, very, very close. So to even now, we learn from them. When my cousin Ruben died, I think I told you recently, we went to Maryland. That's Uncle Walter's children, my cousin Femi, Usla, them. That's Laurie and I and Gerald. But the younger generation, we gotta keep reminding it, and it's understandable because it's like 30 years between us. A generation is 30 years, so they're not as close, and so what we're doing now is to kind of encourage them to have another family reunion, because usually that's how also being away from home, being a diaspora, it's important to keep people together. So we did it. Like my generation, we had 1, 2, maybe 3 reunions. We used to have them every 5 years. And it started actually with Mom, Mrs. Brumskine, Lucille Brumskine, because she said to my cousin, Charles Walker Brumskine, who ran for president, that y'all need to get together. And that's how we had the first reunion in America. So it's a very close-knit family, and the hope is that we will encourage that next generation so they can continue to do that. But they're very interested in the world, now that you said it. They're interested in our picture. That's how that Facebook page started, because they also want to know, they want to get involved. They want to know their ancestry, so that's a good thing. I want to say this because what I've noticed is that, because with me personally, because my dad always talked about his family history, it made me interested in knowing, right? But particularly with the Brumskine side of the family, because my last name is Brumskine, it's not Worrell. But I feel it's a privilege to be a part of this documentary, because a lot of times at home, what we do, we just go about looking at our paternal side of the family, and we don't look at the maternal. So looking at it from this lens, it really brings joy to me, because I have always wanted to know holistically, who am I? And to find out who you are, these are all the pieces that come together to make the person that you are. I would like to start this with a preface that the most important thing for us as Liberian, for me personally, definitely as a person, I always now think of myself as a person who been in the diaspora twice. I say that because we came here, most of us right out of high school, because that's when the coup d'etat happened in Liberia in 1980. So we came here, young people, we came here out of high school. So basically we came with our parents, if you want to say it like that. And then so a lot of us always had this affinity to home. So you want to go back to Liberia. And so I went back to Liberia. I graduated from Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. And the desire was to go to law school because my dad is an attorney. But then my dad was trying to discourage me from going to law school. And especially going back to Liberia to law school because of the coup. But I was insistent. I said, I want to go home, go to law school. And so I graduated from Louis Arthur Grimes School of Law, just like my dad. And then came back here. Well, life happens, you meet people, and my desire was to stay in Liberia and practice law because I met someone and I thought that would be the end of my life. That's what I was going to be. Well, my dad was insistent, just like his mother, like my grandmother, I told you, Margaret Brumskine, with that insistence, go and get a master's and then you can come back and do whatever you want to do. Well, I come to get the master, and then they had another civil uprising. I came 1989, and it was December when that whole thing started in Liberia. So we found ourselves again in the diaspora, because then my parents came for my graduation in June and couldn't go back to Liberia. in hindsight, it's a blessing. It's not a curse, because we stayed in this country. We learned how to live here. And I remember Vygotsky, who is a educational philosopher, he said the highest form of intelligence is cultural intelligence, moving from one society to another and being able to thrive in your new society. So yeah, so we came here, went to law, got a master's in law, practiced law for 10 years with an intellectual property firm in Manhattan. And then I lost my job during the time when 9/11 happened, and had to reinvent myself, because I have been teaching as an adjunct professor at Baruch College for 7 years. So the New York State sent me this letter and said, if you sign up to teach public school, we will pay for you to get a master's. So I got a master's in science, in the science of teaching, and I taught public school for 18 years. I'm going to retire in June. And it's been a journey, because when I first got to Fordham for the master's program, and they said, what's your drive? What's bringing you to teaching public school? And I said, this is a leap of faith. I took a leap, and it's been very rewarding, because not only did I teach, but I also was able to work in DOE, the Department of Education school system, to revamp curriculum, do all kinds of things. And so I sit in front of you as a woman who's grateful to have served in whatever capacity I find myself in, whether it's my alumni association, my church. My greatest desire come from, or my greatest joy come from being a prayer warrior at my church, Brooklyn Tabernacle. Every Wednesday I go and we pray over hundreds of prayer requests. And I can't tell you how awesome that feeling is, but that's where I am. So as I wait for my next transition to retirement, this is who I am. I'm Philip's daughter. I'm my father's daughter. I'm my mother's daughter too, because she see this, she'll be saying, oh, so you only got a part. I'm my mother's daughter. And I'm so blessed, because I have a natural born mother and my stepmother, and both of them, I'm their daughter. I take care of them in the best way that I can. So that's who I am. And I'm your friend too, and a sister. But it's been an interesting journey, and I'm grateful that the Lord gave me the opportunity to do this. The person who influenced me the most in my life has been my dad. My grandfather, to a certain extent, my maternal grandfather, because my mother's father, M.O. Davis, was a huge impact in the first 13 years of my life, because I didn't become a resident of my father's home until I was 13. So from birth to 13 years old, my grandfather on my mother's side, my maternal grandfather, was the person who took care of me as far as where I lived, what happened to me. And so he was a huge influence. He and my dad, those are the two men in my life who have been great influences. What my grandfather gave me was a sense of self-esteem and respect. So I never had to worry about who am I. You know, in Liberia, you get this situation where people, especially if you're a child who's born to a parent who, you know, they're not married, there's that feeling of, oh, you know, you're less than. And Grandpa Emo, from the time I was born, he just made me feel so self-confident, so that I didn't have to worry about, you know, going to live with my dad at 13 and having a stepmother and feeling like you're out of place. It never happened. Because my grandpa, while I was leaving to go live with my dad, he said, if there's a problem, you come back to me. So I never had that, oh, where am I going? What's going on with me? And my dad was super, what's the word? He was very effective in making us a family. He taught us to respect mom with there were no confusion about who was in charge in our house. Mrs. Lucille Brumskine was in charge of our house, but my dad also made us feel very much at home with her. So it wasn't that kind of confusion where you You know, you can't disrespect your mom, your father's wife, who's your mom, but also you're taken care of well, because you're not treated different, or you're not made to feel uncomfortable. So those are the two men who had a lot of influence on me. But now, guess what? Every morning when I get up, because I love to bake, and I learned how to bake for my Mimi. And every morning when I get up to bake, the two women who are always come to my thought are my Aunt Mimi and my Aunt Femi. Like I will tell you how Uncle Walter went in and out of the house. I would be Dr. Brumskine, his wife, Aunt Femi. She also baked very well. So from those two women, those memories when I get up to make my cornbread or my rice bread or whatever it is, they always come back to my mind. So to answer that question, who got the greatest impact or the greatest influence, will be my maternal grandfather and my father. But those women also serve an awesome role in, shaping me to the woman that I am today. Infamy died. She died before he made me, I think. Yeah. My favorite Liberian food is pan butter, just like my dad. We used to love that pan butter. My favorite, and it's a dish that is also connected to Buchanan. I love pan butter. My dad used to love pan butter, so that's my favorite Liberian food. Okay, so Cherin, I have another story. Every time we ask a story, it's out with me to something else that make us laugh. My dad had an opportunity for someone to do a photo documentary of him. This was the girl's name. She's a Greaves. I've forgotten her first name, but that's Councillor George Henry's niece. That's his sister's daughter. So she lived here in Brooklyn Heights, which is right across from us here. And she was doing this photo documentary about Liberian men, prominent men, and all this situation. Asked to do a documentary for my dad. He said, "Oh, call my daughter," as if I'm the one who's doing the documentary. So I come in, and then he said, "Well, I told the little girl if she come, I'm only going to be able to do it if you're here." My dad refused to do this thing, Jerry. He keeps saying, "Oh, I'm my daughter. Ask her. She know who I am. She know where I live. Blah blah blah." So my dad would want to be remembered as a man who loved his family, as a man who loved God, and as a man, because these are his exact words at the end of his life. Maybe 4 or 5 years before my dad passed, I was taking care of him. I was here. And every time I come from work, I say, "How you doing?" I call him Pa. "How you doing, Pa?" He said, "I'm trying my best." And as a man who did his best. Those are the things. He would want to be remembered as a family man, a child of God, and a man who did his best. Oh, Cherry, my dad was he was a very intelligent man. He was very introspective. He was very, like I told you, he had integrity. So my dad always looked at the picture of the whole. He was more interested in us as a nation than just the politics of, what we used to say in Labrador, two party versus, that's the only party we have, right? Two party versus whatever other party was there. My dad was more into he was a citizen of the world. So I guess his thing was for, like, his thought pattern and his desire and his thoughts were always having a Liberia where the majority of the people could benefit. That was his thought. Because he said to me during the coup, because the coup happened in Liberia, and I don't know if you remember you had that experience, but at some point people were going from house to house. They were coming to our house or something. And I said, "Oh, but why are people trying to hurt us?" And he said, "Look, girl, you live in a country where if the majority of the people are not happy, it's not going to be a happy place." So he was aware how it was important that if you live in a nation, the nation has to take care of its people. So he wasn't like a two-party man or this man. He was more a man who wished that we had a nation where more people could be okay. So, like, and the way he did it was our house. We, in our home, all the people who worked with us ate there. And my dad would find a place for them to live. If we had a cook and there was a house where somebody was renting a room, he would pay for the person to have a room to stay in. that's the kind of philosophy he had, where if somebody's working for you, if you make them comfortable, they'll be able to take care of you. Yeah, so he wasn't, you know, and you know, he worked for Tubman. So, you know, he never said anything, anything like negative. He just felt like the masses of the people in Liberia could get more. It would be nice if they could at least be able to live well.